what I can't get past, Buck, in sort of the foundational element here of these charges is, and this may be a little bit rudimentary for some of you, but I think for a lot of people out there, this is going to be an important discussion to understand. Campaign finance law, by and large, is designed to focus on federal elections, as we typically talk about it, right? Federal Election Commission. And what they are trying to do in New York is use effectively federal campaign laws to try to peg Donald Trump for a state law violation. And that is an unbelievable hurdle that I don't think they can get past legally. And what I mean by that is what Trump did, they investigated in the Southern District of New York to consider pursuing him for federal charges. And they said, ultimately, we don't like this case. And they walked away from it. This case has been out there circulating now for going on 7 years, Buck. This initially arose in October of 2016. So I think there's probably a statute of limitations issue with that as well that would be a very viable line of legal attack for Trump. But I don't see how they are going to maneuver a state law violation in a federal election. Because remember, Trump in 2016 is running for a federal office. If Trump had been running for governor of New York, okay. If Trump had been running for mayor of New York City, maybe they can make these accusations stick. I think what ultimately will end up happening, if these charges are brought, is, as you talked about yesterday, went all the way to the Supreme Court, what happened to Virginia's governor. And they finally said, even though he had been convicted, this is not a legitimate method by which this case could have been tried. I think these charges, the fact that they were filed in the first place, are going to be tossed on appeal regardless of what Alvin Bragg ends up doing. Now, that doesn't change the political ramifications, but what is required here is such a novel and unprecedented legal theory that regardless of whether a jury believes that Trump is guilty, and they might just because a lot of people in New York City hate Trump, they have a very favorable forum. But if you actually look at these charges, I think they're going to be tossed out by judges. And remember, judges decide issues of law. Juries decide issues of fact. I think this is an issue of law. I don't believe that these charges are going to be upheld as a legal matter as the appellate process begins. Now, it might take years before we get a resolution, but in doing my deep dive, I don't think there's any legitimate legal basis to bring these charges.
Have to look at the incentives, right? Charlie Munger, show me the incentive, I'll show you the result. What are the incentives at this point for Alvin Bragg as the DA of Manhattan to not bring versus to bring the charges in this case that could come any day now? I think we both agree, and I really haven't heard anyone who disagrees that the incentives are overwhelmingly in favor of Bragg bringing the charges for him as an individual and for the Democrat Party more broadly. And so that brings us then to what's really going on here, which is this is just the usage of the law as a political weapon. And Democrats really believe that you can tear down any institution in order to save it when it comes to Donald Trump. It doesn't matter what it is. They're all basically, I mean, you saw, Clay, I tweeted out this morning, there's a New York Times piece, and this is how they phrase it, okay? This is their version of your legal analysis is the legal intricacies that could make or break the case against Trump. If the New York Times is coming up with a headline like that, anybody who understands what's really happening here can see this is bullcrap. This is obvious bullcrap. This is the worst kinds of politicization of prosecutors. And I say this to people all the time. You know, you can be worried about different federal agencies and the harassment you get from them. You can be worried about the politicization of the media and academia and all these places. Prosecutors have the most power to ruin your life the fastest with the least oversight. If prosecutors start to decide they're going to crush people because of politics, not the law, then we are on a very, very dangerous path as a society. I mean, you see this happening in other places. This is right up there with, the intelligence agency that actually decides who the president is, which, as I say that out loud, feels kind of weird given what happened in 2016. But anyway, in terms of how quickly a society will go into dysfunction and decay, if you have prosecutors that are locking people up for being associated with the wrong ideas and trumped up, pardon the phrase, charges, we have very little to be positive about for the future of all legal institutions in this country. So it is a big deal that he would do this, right? It's not a big deal for Trump. He's not going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Big deal legally, obviously the political implications are huge. But the fact that we're even having this conversation, this is absurd. And Bill Clinton lied under oath, as we all know. It was a federal crime, 100%, no question about it. But everyone kind of decided after a while, they're like, well, we're not going to prosecute the former president, even if it's under the statute of limitations. Now, you could say that you disagree with that one way or the other, but there was something of a... That's what happened.
We already... So let me talk big picture here. So I think that this, on appeal, will be that this case will be tossed. And whatever the result is, to the extent that it ever gets filed and that a jury determines whether Trump violated this law, whatever else, I believe that it will get tossed on appeal.
But doesn't 90% of the damage get done, Clay, if we even get to one jury convicting Trump on this one charge? Doesn't Bragg win at that point? Does it matter?
Bragg wins no matter what. And this is the challenge, because Bragg's constituency is New York. And if he's the bad guy, meaning the badass, I should say, who finally charges Trump with a crime, he can write a check, right? He can be the next mayor of New York City. He can be the next governor of the state of New York. He can be the next senator when there's a decision made for Chuck Schumer or somebody like that to step down. Like, he becomes the baddest guy on the planet. He's the guy who walked up to the bully and knocked him down, right? For him, it's a total win. For the country, it's a disaster. And this is the problem in general that I foresee. Buck, do you think we have the best and brightest representing us as Democrats or Republicans in political office right now?
Definitely not.
And why is that? I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and he said his argument was, and I think it's a good one, he said, back in the day, in like the 40s, 50s, whatever, the difference between being a CEO of a major company and making $40, $50 million a year or making $150,000 as a politician, it didn't exist. You didn't have that seismic gap between what a top CEO could earn and what a top politician could earn. That dollar figure was not as substantial. So his argument was you got higher quality talent that moved into politics. A lot of people, probably a lot of you out there listening to us right now, a lot of people say, I'm not willing to get involved in politics because I'll get attacked and destroyed, and it doesn't even pay that well. Meanwhile, I can run my own business. I can have a normal life. There are a lot of people out there who make that decision. To me, if Trump gets charged, what this does is send the message that if you decide to run for president, we're going to set the precedent that some DA somewhere is going to dive through everything that you've ever done in your life. And no matter how perfect you think you may have lived, if a DA decides to investigate you for years, they're going to find something that they can charge you with. And this further devalues the talent level of people who are interested in getting involved in politics.
That's all true. The only difference here would be the presidency has been different up to this point. It's certainly true if you're running to be a Republican senator, governor. I sit here and talk all the time, Clay, about the number of witch hunt, weaponized prosecutor cases against Republicans in the last 10 years that you can rattle off the top of your head, right? You can talk about Chris Christie with Bridgegate. Oh, my gosh. They said it was a mass murder event on MSNBC. Do you remember this? They claimed, I'm not sure if it was Maddow or it was it was Lawrence O'Donnell, I think. It was one of them, that because there may have been ambulances delayed by Bridgegate, it could have been a multiple fatality event by the traffic jam. I mean, that was a real argument they made. Okay, Bridgegate, Chris Christie, nothing came of it. Scott Walker in Wisconsin, John Doe investigations, nothing came of it. Governor Bob McDonnell tried to throw him in prison for years and years. Supreme Court had to overturn it. Donald Trump, Russia collusion, obviously. Rick Perry in Texas, they were trying to bring some felony charge against him for interfering in a prosecutor's office because he didn't want some drunk prosecutor who had a DUI still running his office. You go down the list, there are all these Republicans that have had prosecutors weaponized. People probably shouting names. I talked about Ted Stevens earlier in the week. I can't even remember all of them. What is the equivalent of the other side, Clay? Who are the Democrat politicians who, without cause, without basis, have been hounded by criminal investigations, efforts to throw them or their family members or close associates in prison for nothing? People might start saying, oh, well, the Clintons are crooks.
Also, the Clintons never have legitimately faced any charges, right? So, I mean, they've been investigated through. I just think, in addition to taking more and more talent off the field for politicians, it will become so commonplace. Same way impeachment. Remember back in the day, if you're old enough to remember, like the fact that they considered impeachment for Richard Nixon and everything else was such a transformative moment. I think it was the first time since Andrew Johnson had been impeached. And now I kind of feel like in the next decade, we'll probably have 6 or 7 different impeachment trials before all is said and done. I mean, it's just, and people right now are saying, well, we should impeach Biden, and you know how it's going to end. I feel like it's such a standardized political process. Now you have to presume that you're going to get charged with a crime if you run.
I would just say that maybe there's some historical perspective here that's also useful, which is even if you go back to the founding, it was rough, man. You know, people talk about Madison and Jefferson and Washington, and we think about these figures who were geniuses at the construction of government, and they were just tattling on each other to various newspapers, and oh, he's a monarchist, and oh, he's having an affair, and oh, he's misusing funds all the time.
Yes.
All the time.
I mean, Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton. As bad as you think things are now, like he literally killed him.
James Monroe stepped in to stop a duel with Hamilton, and later was with Aaron Burr, now I'm forgetting. And then later Aaron Burr ended up shooting Alexander Hamilton. So these guys actually shot each other. These are the founding fathers. Like, things were getting crazy then too. So as much as we like to think that we're in this period of, oh, politics are more polarized, and I mean, to call somebody after the Revolutionary War, to call somebody a monarchist was effectively to call them a traitor. And this was what they were, the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists. Anyway, I'm just thinking about it right now. It's just amazing. We all think, oh, they just sat around with their quill pens and wrote the Constitution. They were trying to stab each other in the eyes with their quill pens. They were having a lot of fights behind the scenes.